I think, I'm going to try and do something terrible, which is to have 180 slides. So I'm going to go quickly through them. But in the work that I'll be presenting, I think I'm intersecting a little bit with the previous seminar in the seminar series, the tree seminar. So if you forgive me to mix vegetation and ice a little bit, but my work is focused on the collision of human and geological time scales. And I'm very interested in looking at manifestations of paradigm shifts through more pedestrian or near examples and fragments of these sort of global changes. And I look at them through architecture, social history, and remains in the natural environment. So the things that I'm going to be talking about today are two research projects, and I'll tell them as a story from the perspective of the problems and how they manifest in exhibitions. So this is a piece of ice that I found on the street in 2013. I had been to a movie at a local movie theater in Reykjavik, and in the foyer of the movie theater, the University of Iceland's glaciological study line had a presentation, sort of like an open scientific presentation for the public. And they were displaying pieces of glacial ice that they were showing to children and passersby, how information on history and earth history and weather history can be detected through information in the ice. And I had sort of just noted this, and it was this very beautiful block of ice. And after I, just walked through and went to a movie, and after the film, the science fair was over, and the piece of ice was in the gutter on the street outside, melting into the gutter. And it had, gone from being this object of study and wonder into just being, something that is discardable and non-important, basically. And I was very struck by this, so I took the ice with me. It's a big block of ice that I bicycled with home, had it under my arm, and basically was grappling with this object that sort of shifted so easily from being an important object of study into being something discardable. So I had it in my freezer for a year, and then sort of periodically looked at it and just had it as this, object. And at some point, I decided to run it through an experiment where I cut it in two parts. One of the parts I cast into a cardboard box of plaster concrete, and dropped the block of ice into the concrete. And as the concrete hardens and sets, it heats up, and preserved the shape of the ice block within minutes, and as well melted the half. And at this point, this was done without intention, but more as a way to sort of deal with this object and try and understand it through manipulating it in this way. And then I had this block of concrete with the shape of the small iceberg. I cut that in two parts again and photographed it from each side, looking at this new object that showed this kind of trace of the block of ice. And I'm gonna, so that's one half that I cast into this concrete, and the other half I had in the studio and was, just kind of looking at it, seeing it slowly start to melt, and decided to I just want to say also that this is, at this point in the project, this is without really any intention, but rather this kind of playful attempt to approach and understand what this is, because it's something so unimportant, and maybe a 10-kilogram piece of ice that is understandable, that is let melt into the gutter when it's served its purpose. But I was really just kind of interested in confronting it and seeing what it could signify. And so with a heat gun on a block of black paper, I started to melt the remaining half of ice, and had two cameras set up. One of the cameras the perspective that you see is on the left side, was pointed very close up to the ice, and didn't show the movement of my hand with a heat gun going all around, creating this sort of two viewpoints onto the ice, where one of the images or one of the videos looks almost as if it's a time lapse that is showing a process of melting happening without any kind of cause, and the other one from a larger perspective showing this sort of direct manipulation. And I'm gonna try and go into the video here. Let's see if this can work. I'm just going to jump through the video. This is the part of this diptych 2-channel work where the heat gun is, we're just actually seeing what's happening. And gradually this block of ice disappears onto the stack of paper that absorbs the water. And the second, let's see. Here we go. This is the other channel that is shot much closer, so not including the hand. So this is done sort of just as a process in the studio, and like I said, afterwards I had the kind of remains, the leftovers, almost kind of just the framework of these experiments, these pieces of paper that had absorbed both the heat from the heat gun and partial burning, and as well sort of the changes to the paper after it had absorbed the water from the molten ice. At this point, this was just an experiment with no sort of exhibition or physical project in mind. Soon afterwards, I was invited to participate in a climate conference in Greenland called the Ilulissat Climate Days, which was a large international conference on climate change and its relationship to the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. This was in the context of a project I did with my colleague Anna Lindahl, and our project was titled Infinite Next. And so it was this participation in the climate conference and a residency at the Ilulissat Art Museum in Greenland. You can see the location in the little blue dot there. This is the Jakobshavn ice sheet close to Ilulissat, and where you can see the changes in the extent of the ice sheet over the years. And this is the ice fjord at Ilulissat, where we were in residence. And during this time in the residency, and I'm tying this to the work that I just showed, but during the time of the residency, we were participants in the Svale summer school. And Svale is an inter-Nordic glaciological research network that we were very excited to join with on an expedition to Kangerlussuaq, and more specifically to the Point 660 glacier just close by Kangerlussuaq. Here you see the airport in Kangerlussuaq and the research station in the bottom right corner, where a lot of expeditions to the ice sheet depart from. In the Svale Summer School, we were basically just participating as in training in ways in which the ice sheet is measured, and core drillings. And here you see some of the participants doing the experiments, building a weather station. This is a ground penetrating radar measurement of the bedrock underneath the glacier. And during this time, we were working at the Ilulissat Art Museum, and I decided to exhibit the kind of results or the work from the studio experiment with melting the block of ice in the Ilulissat Museum, which is home to a large collection of work by Danish painter, 19th century painter Emanuel Petersen, who painted and depicted these very majestic images and romantic images of life in Greenland, and more specifically ice in Greenland. And I think that this is very much, I was very interested in looking at the material that Isabel is working with in relation to this, and the work that I did, I kind of inserted it into the collection as footnotes to Petersen's work. So in a way, many of the sites that he is depicting are, very much changed today, and my interest with the photographs and with the experiment is to kind of look at this absence, trace, something that is hollow, and kind of time passing. So I look at this work as footnotes to that collection, and inserted it in many different places. And this is another iteration of the work on display at the Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. And then I'm gonna kind of switch gears and look at ice and glacial time in a different context. I've been sort of working on a project for the last coming on 14 years, titled 3009 Years. And it revolves around the garden of my grandparents. And now this is more of a kind of a plant time related project, but it has to do also with glaciers, but maybe sort of by proxy or a little bit later on. But I've been working on a project relating to this garden since 2009. So this is an image of my grandparents and their children in front of their newly acquired house in the middle of the 1940s. Like many working class families, they were aspiring to build a home and couldn't find a place to build due to the sort of shortages and tension of the Second World War. And like many families in their position, they found land to build on the outskirts of the city, where there was no running water for some time. Electricity was scarce, kind of off the grid in a way. So this is the house that they purchased, which was very run down and in a very barren area with ice age boulders scattered around these kind of meadows. And this is the same view a couple of years later. And you can see the garden with these sort of glacial polish rocks strewn around and not much vegetation at all. And here you see the environment at the time around. In 2009, after they had both passed away, the house was up for sale. And due to the original context of the building, it had been outside of town planning. So the gardens of these vernacular homes that people built themselves and drew themselves, these lots tend to be larger than the average lots today. And over the course of the 20th century later, these buildings, such as my grandparents' building, would be swallowed up by, the kind of more and more organized town. But they remain within the town planning as these sort of like odd sizes. And so at the time when they had both passed away and the house was for sale, it's of course very attractive for demolition and for building a much larger property than the old house that is there today. And again, in a similar way as before, I approached the site with unclear intention, kind of, not thinking that I was gonna use the experiments that I was doing for anything specific, but as maybe often happens, it's sort of like one thing gets added on top of another. But this is the house in 2009. And as I knew that it would be demolished, most likely, and the garden would be demolished, I decided to spend some time there in the summer and collect specimen of every plant that grew in the garden, every tree, and dry it. And at the time, this was just for collecting, for the sake of collecting and constructing an archive. I'm going to skip here over a few slides. But in 2019, in 2017, the house had still not been demolished, but and the garden had not been demolished either, but it had, went into wild growth, and the house had been standing derelict. And so I decided once again to do a collection of every plant species in the garden. This is another view, but in winter, and spend the summer collecting plants constructing a second herbarium. And now this was in the context of an exhibition that I was doing, a solo exhibition at a museum in Reykjavik called the Living Art Museum. And here you see the property from the air. Many things had sort of happened in these years that had passed on the lot. Different groups of people and individuals had inhabited the space over these years that had passed. Different kind of small gestures had been made on the land. This fireplace had been built. And here we see one of the sort of only remains of the area before the house was built is this rock shaved by the moving Ice Age glacier that sticks out from the grass that has been preserved there. It's maybe worth noting that the garden is completely constructed out of borrow or sort of bartered soil and plants that had been moved there over the first years when my grandparents lived there in the 40s and 50s. Soil and trees were moved there as foundations for buildings were being built other places. So gradually the soil level rose in the garden, and the sort of rocks that were there originally got buried. But this rock always remained over the surface, and you can see names of children. My father and his siblings carved out their names into the rock over the sort of 1940s and 50s. And I did a kind of a survey of the land, and most of my work there is done sort of with my face in the ground, and I'm looking at this space as a world in itself, and sort of narrowing the horizon, observing the garden as a complete space. And here's working images from the second collection of plants. I'm skipping through a couple of images, but this is an image of the exhibition at the Living Art Museum. And on the two sides of the image, you see the archives of plants. That is a complete archive of every plant that grew in these two different time periods in the garden. And these sculptures I'll not talk about now, but related to this, at the same time as I was working in the garden collecting the second collection of plants, I was very curious by news that were emerging of pieces of birch that were being unearthed at the Breiðamerkurjökull glacier in southeast Iceland. Here we see with the little red arrow the location of Breiðamerkurjökull. The ice sheet itself, Vatnajökull, covers about 10% of Iceland, and Breiðamerkurjökull here is a large outlet glacier. And at this exact location here, by the root of the glacier, in 2017, glaciologists and geologists were observing that remains of an ancient forest were being unearthed as the glacier is rapidly receding. And these are large trunks of birch trees that had been buried in a catastrophic natural event 3,000 years ago, some form of landslide or a complete turnaround of the earth there, which buried the forest, and the subsequent glaciation that happened. So the ice sort of covered this entire area, and now as the ice sheet is receding dramatically every year, this earth is kind of just being exposed. Here is the view from kind of like the lagoon as you sail up to the station. These are just some working images when I've brought groups of students to the location, but this is the site. And I was very lucky to be able to join an expedition by the Southeast Iceland Natural Institute and the Icelandic Forestry Service to the site where geologists and plant scientists were unearthing some trunks of trees that were known to be there. And this is at the same time that I was working in the garden. So these two kind of processes are happening simultaneously. This is a birch tree trunk that is peering out from the side of the mountain. And this is the same tree trunk. It was about a 2-meter long trunk. But the moment that it was brought out, it was cut into pieces so that it could be transported into a process where it would undergo this intense pressure to squeeze out any liquids from the wood and exchange it for an oil-based liquid to preserve it. And again, I think a lot of my work happens through an initial coincidence that then starts unraveling. So there's always, that's why I'm kind of describing this process like this, because there is this moment where you're not working with intention that I think is so important to have attention. That's sort of where I think everything happens. And I was looking at this tree trunk, and it's known that it's exact, it is quite exact that it is 3,000 years old, and this tree had been around 100 years old when it fell. And then it was just kind of cut into pieces with this, very, very casual saw that you buy in any construction store. And this sawdust was just laying on the beach. And I was just obsessed with this sawdust. So I took with me, collected the sand from underneath the tree, and started sieving through and sort of like very meticulously going through each piece of sawdust. And these are microscopic in size, and sort of like sieving them out and collecting them and categorizing them. And I think that there was something very kind of a collision, another type of collision that happens when you have sawdust from such an ancient piece of wood, and the thing that happens when you fell a tree and you turn it into planks of wood, where something natural, something organic becomes something industrial and becomes a quantifiable economic size. So I was very interested in that sort of meeting place. And eventually that work became part of this exhibition in the Living Art Museum, where the sawdust from this tree trunk was juxtaposed with a collection of plants from the garden. And I think that that's kind of my key interest in a way, is to use the garden as a site to mirror larger planetary changes. In some way, it's mirroring this very personal context with something geological. This very short human time of thing that happens in the span of 80 years in this garden, a history that is about to disappear, a history that in a kind of a planet scale has very little significance, but on an individual scale is of a lot of significance. And here I'm also gonna go kind of quickly through a project that sort of the continuation of this was a residency that I did at the Sachin Experimental Forest in in California. It's a research station that belongs to the University of California at Berkeley, and they have an artist in residence program with the Nevada Museum of Art Center of Art and Environment, where I again was in residency with a colleague of mine, Anna Lindahl, who I was with in Greenland as well. Seychen is an interesting site because the trees there, it's a forest that has grown since the complete clear cutting of much of California's ancient forests in the gold rush. These are some images from the area during the cutting of the forest. And in the residency there, I found a tree trunk of a tree that had fallen 20 years ago. It was one of the very, very few ancient trees that had continued growing in the forest after the gold rush, but had been spared because it didn't fit the sawing mills because it grew irregularly. And this tree collapsed from its own weight and blocked the road, so it was cut up into pieces and thrown across the road. And I was interested in the disintegrating remains of it, and was allowed to take with me the core of the tree, which I froze for 1 year and brought back to the studio. And I'm just going to kind of skip a little bit here, but we did some core drilling from the tree and determined its age, and determined sort of the period when it started growing and when it stopped growing. And simultaneously I had been continuing to go back to the site at the Breiðamerkurjökull Glacier, now sort of using methods that I had been developing, kind of just crawling through the river, crawling on the site, and started discovering pieces of trees by using that sort of continuation of these coincidental methods from the original trip. Here's some images of the site. And during this time, I discovered 2 pieces of birches that had just kind of become unearthed. And in an exhibition that I was working on at the time, was again just trying to, how do you try and understand an object like this that looks understandable, but its time scale is something that is hard to fathom. So the method that I started experimenting with was to surgically remove with tweezers the rocks that had been pushed into the tree and fell originally. And you see here these 2 images where the rocks have been removed, and then I put them back in afterwards. And in an exhibition, I decided to kind of construct a conversation between these 2 trees, the one from Seychen in California and the one from Breiðamerkurjökull Glacier, and the core drilling from the tree in California that shows now I can't remember how many years. I think that tree was around 400 years old, or had grown for 400 years. And I took the core of it and enlarged it by over 100 times, so that as a viewer in the exhibition, and this image of the core was printed onto silk fabric, and as an archive constructed throughout the museum where it was exhibited. And as a viewer, you would kind of like walk into the core from that tree, and on sides of the walls, you would look at this tree unearthed by the receding glacier. And so you would sort of enter into this dialogue between these 2 individuals. I forgot to start my watch, so I'm unsure, but I think that I'm probably done with the time, right?
Yeah, it's around the time. I mean, you can take a couple minutes to finish up if you'd like.
Okay, I've just got a couple of slides on the sort of next steps of the garden project. It is a permanent sculpture in public space. So I have been in dialogue with the contractor who currently owns the lot, and he will demolish the house and demolish the garden next summer. And I have been gifted all of the debris from the house and all of the earth material, around 500 cubic meters of earth, and the bedrock, the glacial polish boulders that are the bedrock underneath the building. And this is a very childlike diagram of what I will do on the site, but I'm in dialogue with the town authorities. And basically the demolition will happen in this order. The building will be crushed and will become a heap, almost sort of like a landfill. All of this material would have been sent to a landfill, but instead it'll be moved, hopefully just down the street onto a large open green where the sort of fragmented building will go first, and then all of the earth material and trees and vegetation will go on top of that, and finally the bedrock will be dynamited away and will be dumped on top of the heap, which we're estimating will be around 8 meters tall in places. And so it will, in a way, become like the landscape that was there before the house was built, which are these boulders moved around by the Ice Age glacier, shaved by the moving glacier and ice sheet. So in a way, it's a reverse. Here you see a building nearby in its building process in the 1960s. And you see the boulders around. This is the original landscape. So it will, in a way, return the place back into its original state. So that's the sort of next iteration of this project. And hopefully that's happening sometime in the spring. But yes, I think that's the conclusion. Thank you.